your guys' page compare and order? Fractions, decimals, and percents.
Hey, you want to report the time?
Today is 11/25/19. So in order to compare and order fractions, decimals, and percents, my one and only rule is they have to be in the same form. Meaning they have to all be fractions, they have to all be decimals, or they have to all be percentages. In order to do any of this, they have to be in that same form. So let's write that down. One rule must be in the same form. All fractions, all decimals, or all percents. They have to all be in that same form. If they are not all in that same form, it is extremely difficult to actually be able to compare and order properly. Now, there are times where each one of these is worth doing. So sometimes you might want to use fractions, sometimes you might want to use decimals, sometimes you might want to use percentages. Do you think I care which one you do? No, I don't. Because no matter what, in the end, whether you do all percents or all decimals, you should still come out with the same answer in the end. Is that understood? So you do whichever one is most comfortable for you. Is that clear? Okay, so let's do an example. Sometimes you will get an example or a problem where you are told to compare two fractions. If they are both fractions, leave them as fractions, and I have a trick for you. How many of you remember the butterfly method? Anyone taught that method for how to add fractions? Anyone taught something called cross multiplication? Okay. So this is new to you. Some of you might have seen this, and then some of you may be like, oh yeah, I remember that. So when you have two fractions, if you need to know which one's bigger, all you have to do is cross multiply, which means you take the number in the denominator, which is a 9, and I'm going to go to the number that is across from it, which is a 12, and I'm going to multiply those numbers together. And then I'm going to write it right above that 12. So I'm going to write it right above my numerator. So 9 times 12 is?
98. 108.
108. So I would write 108. I would then do the exact same thing with my other two numbers. I would start at that 13. And I would multiply those two numbers together, so it's 3 and 13. Three times 13 is?
39.
And I would write that right above the 3. Then I ask myself the question, okay, which number is bigger, the 39 or the 108?
108.
So the number that is bigger, if I rewrite this so I have some room, 3/9 and 12/13. If 108 is bigger, am I going to put a greater than sign, a less than sign, or an equal to sign? I'm going to put a less than sign in between them, because 3/9 is less than 12/13. So if you have two fractions, that's one way you can do it. Do your cross products, and you can figure out which one's bigger. Questions on that at all? Okay, example 2. I want to compare 6/10 to 0.06. I now have a fraction and a decimal. Can I compare a fraction to a decimal? No, I can't. What do I have to do? I need to change it. I either need to change this to a decimal, or I need to change this to a fraction. Which one do you think is probably going to be easier?
Fraction.
Do you think I care which one? You can do whichever one you want. If you want to change the decimal to a fraction and do what we just did, or get common denominators, or whatever the case may be, go for it. Or if you want to change this to a decimal and compare decimal to decimal, do that as well. It's your choice. I personally always go to decimals. That's my go-to. It's always been my go-to, because the decimal is always in between a fraction and a percent. It's that middle ground. You can always go from a fraction to a decimal and a percent to a decimal, but you can't go from a fraction to a percent without stopping at a decimal first. So a decimal is always that middle ground. And 6/10, that should be an easy one to write as a decimal, right guys? Because that should be one that, say this, everyone say this out loud for me. What's this say? Everyone say it out loud for me, please. 6/10. So you write 6/10. So how do I write that? I write 0.6. Get in that habit of putting that 0 in front. Now, how many numbers do I have after the decimal here?
1.
How many numbers do I have after the decimal here?
2.
I need the same amount of numbers. So that means they both need to have 2 after. So what am I going to put after this 6 to make it have 2 afters? A 0. So I am now comparing 60 and what? 60 and 6, right? So what's bigger, 60 or 6?
60.
So greater than sign or less than sign? This is going to be a greater than sign, because 60 is bigger than 6. Okay, let's try another example. Example 3. 3/5 compared to 40%. 3/5 compared to 40%. Now, I want everyone to change this fraction to a percent for me. Tell me what 3/5 is as a percentage. It should be one of our quick and easy ones. I gave you a trick for it. Someone raise their hand and tell me what's my trick. How could I easily find this one? Izzy?
You do both of them times 2, so you can get 10, and then your answer would be 60%.
Because why?
Because 3 times 2 is 6, and then 5 times 2 is 10, so
And that equals?
60%.
Very good. So remember, getting it over 10, getting it over 100 makes our life easier. I multiply by 2, I get 6 over 10. 6 over 10 is 60%. You just add a 0 behind that numerator. If I don't remember that, what will always work? What could I have done?
Divide.
I could have divided, right? I could have done 3 divided by 5, and I still would have gotten 60%. No matter what way you do it, you will get the same answer as long as you do it properly. So I'm now comparing 60% and 40%. So do I put a greater than sign, a less than sign, or an equal to sign? Greater than, because we'd rather have a 60% over a 40%, even though we'd rather not have either of those grades, right? Okay, good. Next example, example 4. 0.305 compared to 35%. Sorry. 0.305 and 35%. Everyone answer that question for me. You either need to change the decimal to a what? Percent, or change the percent to a decimal. So everyone do that for me. Okay, somebody raise your hand and tell me, what is 0.305 written as a percentage? McKenna?
Is it 305?
It is not 305. Lindsay? It is 30.5.
Oh.
Because how many places do we always move the decimal? 2. So I always move it only 2, so it goes to 30.5. If I wanted to change 35% to a decimal, somebody tell me what's that? What is that one going to be, Peyton?
3,500.
It's going to be 3,500, so that's 0.35. I do not care which one you do, but you have to do one or the other. Is that understood?
Yes.
So then hopefully you guys already told me if it was greater than, less than, or equal to. And what is it, everyone?
3,500. Less than.
Greater than, less than, or equal to, everyone?
Less than.
You guys have to know whether it's a greater than, less than, or equal to sign. Izzy?
So, you know how the question was 0.305 and then 35%?
Yep.
For the 35%, wouldn't it be 0.350 because you have to add a 0?
Yeah.
Have the same numbers?
Yep, you should add a 0 right behind that, so that way you're comparing 305 to 350. And it makes a lot more sense when you have the same amount of numbers, because otherwise you're looking at 35 and 305, and 305 looks a whole lot bigger than the 35. So absolutely add that 0 in. Any questions so far, you guys? McKenna?
Okay, so isn't the other one greater though?
Nope.
No, because if you put that one to a percent, it would be 35%.
Would you rather have 30.5% or 35%? Which number is bigger? 30% or 35%?
I was thinking the bottom. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, you gotta compare like these two, the two decimals, and the two percentages. You can't compare a percent and a decimal. I'm just showing you that I don't care which one you go to. You can go to either one, but only do one. Don't do both, because that'll confuse you.
Okay, that's what I did.
Yep, don't do both, because that'll confuse you.
Okay.
Alright, so just like we have to be able to compare, so I'm going to write down that these are compare problems. And when we compare, we use our greater than, less than, and equal to signs. Sorry, you cannot see that. That's what I did. So I just marked that those were my compare type of problems. When we compare, we use our greater than, our less than, and our equal to signs. We also have to be able to order. So order the numbers in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk about how we order them. So ordering. You'll be given something. Like this, 0.43 or 43 hundredths, 4 ninths, 40%, and 3/8. The first thing you must do is they must all be in the same form. All must be fractions with common denominators. All must be decimals or all must be percentages. As I said earlier, decimals are going to be probably the easiest thing for you to do besides percentages. So decimals and percents are your two easiest. So what we're going to do is we're going to change all of these to decimals. First one, is it a decimal already?
Yes.
So do we have to change it?
No.
Nope. So I'm going to write it down right like this. My next number, I have what? I have a fraction. I need to change it into a... How do I change a fraction into a decimal? Divide. Which number always goes in the house? Good. So everyone do 4 divided by 9. Go to 3 decimal places always. Good question. Always go to 3. How many times can 9 go into 4?
No.
Hey everyone.
No.
Thank you. So what do I put up top? And a? What do I add after the 4? 9 goes into 40. How many times? 4. 9 times 4 is? 40 minus 36 is? What do I add?
0.
What do you notice is going to happen? So how many 4s do I want? 3. Because I always want to go to 4 or to 3 numbers after my decimal. So notice where I put that. Did you notice how I put it right below my other number?
Yeah.
Do you notice how I lined up my decimals, lined up my numbers? Does everyone see that?
Yeah.
That's important. It's going to make it easier for you. 40%. What do I need to change 40% into? Good. Everyone change 40% to a decimal for me. Don't say the answer out loud. Okay, Ben, what'd you get? 0.40. Very good. Because I'm going to take that decimal, which is right behind that 40, because I can't see it, and I'm going to move it 2 places to the left to make that 0.40. Last one, I have 3/8. I have to change that fraction to a what? Decimal. How do I do that? Good. Everyone do 3 divided by 8. Hey, can 8 go into 3, everyone?
No.
What do you put up top?
0 and a decimal.
Good. What do I put after that 3?
0.
8 goes into 30 how many times?
3.
8 times 3 is?
24.
30 minus 24 is?
6.
What do I need to add?
0.
8 goes into 60 how many times?
7.
Everyone should be able to participate in this.
Yeah, come on, Tommy.
8 times 7 is?
56.
60 minus 56 is?
4.
Add a?
0.
And 8 goes into 40 how many times?
5.
Because 8 times 5 is?
40.
So what did we get?
375.
Good. So notice, each and every time I've lined up my decimal. So get them all to decimals, line them all up. Now remember, I always want to have the exact same number of decimals. So how many decimals do I need, or numbers do I need behind each decimal?
3.
I need 3 behind each decimal, so what should I add in the ones that don't have 3?
0.
So I'm going to add a 0 behind the 3, and I'm going to add a 0 behind the 0. That way they each have 3 numbers behind it. So now I can easily compare them. Guys, I need you to stop talking and pay attention up here. It's rude and disrespectful. Okay? Everyone put your finger, because all these zeros are the same, right? So put your finger over that 0 in the decimal. We are now going to compare, or put these in order from least to greatest. So when I look at these numbers, I want the smallest number. I have 430, 444, 400, and 375. Which is the smallest number, everyone?
375.
So I'm going to put a 1 right next to it, because that's my first number. That is my smallest. Now I have 430, 444, and 400. What's the next smallest number, everyone?
400.
So I'm going to put a 2 next to that 400. What's the next smallest number?
430.
So I'm going to put a 3 next to that number, which means the largest number is what? Did that make sense how we figured out which one was bigger, smaller, and then so forth and so on down the road? Okay, here's the part that students almost always forget. Answers. Must always be in original form. You have to put your answers back in the original form. Meaning I can't just leave my answer at what it is right now, because that's not unacceptable. I have to put my answer back in the form that the problem gave them to me in. Which means my smallest decimal was 0.375. What was that up above?
3/8.
So I would write down 3/8 first, because that's the smallest number. That's what comes first. Then I had 400. Well, what was 400? 400 was 40%, so I put a comma, 40%. Then I had 430. What was 430?
43.
That was the 0.43, that 43 hundredths. And then last but not least is,
49.
and that right there is my answer. Questions? Okay, let's do another one. What if I have 2.62 2 2/5 26.8%, (2.26) and 271%. First thing that we have to do for every single number is write them down using decimals. McKenna and Natalie. So the beauty of it is, if it's already a decimal, do we have to do anything?
No.
So do I have to do anything to this first one?
No.
Nope, I'm just going to write it down as 262. (2 2/5). We need to change that one to a decimal. Everyone change that for me, please. Okay, hopefully remembering how to do this, because this one had a trick to it. 2 2/5 is what is a decimal? 2.40. 2.40. 2 40 hundredths. %. Change that to a decimal for me. Destiny, tell me what you got. Okay, so how do we change a percent to a decimal? How many spaces? To what direction? So what would it be? And what goes in front of that decimal point? Nicely done. Good job. Next number is 2.26. Do we have to change that one at all? Nope. I just get to copy that one down. Last one, everyone changed 271% to a decimal. Marin, tell me what you got. 2.71. Now what do I have to add behind all of the numbers that do not have 3 of them?
0.
So I need to add a 0 behind every single one of these but the one that ends in an 8. Because that one already has 3. Now I'm going to go through and number them. Without doing anything, which one of these numbers is the smallest? Good. The one that has a 0 and doesn't have a 2 in front of that decimal, if I cover all of that up, that one has to be the smallest, right? It starts with a 0, it doesn't start with a 2, which means that one has to be first. Now I can cover up all those 2's because they're all the same. And I have 620, 400, 260, and 710. Which number would come next? 260. Which one would come next?
2 and 400.
I just want to know 620, 400, or 710? 400 comes next. Because I'm covering up these 2 points because they don't even matter right now. 620 or 710?
620.
And then last has to be 710. Now you have to rewrite them in original form. So the 0.68 or 0.268, which number was that up above? 26.8%. Do you notice why I'm doing all of this in order? I never changed up my order because otherwise I'll get confused. 2.260, which one was that?
2.26.
That one was exactly the same. I didn't even change it. 2.40. What was 2.40? 2 2/5. The 2.620? And then last but not least is
271%.
271%. So you have to put them back in the original form or they are automatically going to be wrong. Is that understood?
Yes.